Hello, my name's Duncan and welcome to one of my hot takes. This hot take is about how we currently assess hollow trees in arboriculture and how this assessment is moving on to a higher degree of accuracy and thus becoming more meaningful. So quickly, we need to set the context for how hollow trees are commonly assessed in current arboricultural practice. Generally, decay in the stem of a tree is at first suspected before anything further, more advanced testing is undertaken. Common clues come from open cavities, the presence of dead areas on the outer bark, or fruit bodies of fungi associated with the stem, and some arborists use a sounding hammer to try to detect hollowing tree stems too. As more advanced testing is quite expensive, it should only be lavished on trees of some value, if not only high value trees that are thought likely to persist in terms of any other of their conditions. For a low value tree with multiple other structural defects or drawbacks, it's not normally a good reason to spend time and money on advanced quantification of its internal stem decay. Make a decision without that advanced data. In much of arboriculture, the mixed use of microdrilling and tomography is common. One device, typically the microdrill, is used to confirm the findings of the other device, typically sonic tomography. Neither is 100% reliable because of limitations in their testing methods, but mixing the two methods gives considerable confidence in assessing the extent of decay in the stem's cross-section. You can be relatively accurate. Okay, using advanced instruments, we have quantified the decay. So what do we tend to do with this data? Well, it's still common to apply a threshold for safety. Different authors offer different thresholds, all of them based on the thickness of remaining wood of the stem and are based upon a simplistic model that the tree stem is roughly circular in cross-section and the decay column within that stem is also circular. These thresholds vary from 35% of the stem's radius needs to be intact, to 30% needs to be intact, to only 23% needs to be intact, depending on which author one reads. Hopefully, that simplified account of the current methodology that trees are mostly assessed by is clear enough. This hot take cannot consider all other options, just the most common current assessment method. Okay, so what could be improved here? Well, sadly, much could be improved. There are, first, some easy critical questions that need addressing to ensure a calculation for a threshold for stem hollowness is not missing an important factor. It's common as a tree declines that crown also declines in size and or in crown density. If that's the case, there is less static force and less wind drag affecting the hollowing stem, so a greater degree of hollowness could be tolerated in the system. Another initial question to ask is whether the tree is of a species and its vitality is such where a crown reduction by 2 or more meters might reduce loading and wind drag sufficiently, mimicking the natural loss of the tree's upper crown. Of course, some species and some individual trees react poorly, or the growth pattern is arranged such that a significant crown reduction will not work for them. It is common for a tree stem to respond to produce additional wood around a developing hollow or cavity. Currently, most common assessment method often omits to take this into account. What we should be doing is assessing the strength of the swollen section of the stem compared with the strength of a non-decayed section just a little higher up in the tree, which makes for a fair comparison. The image on this slide shows a cross-section in the decayed part of a tree stem and how it should be compared with a reference cross-section set immediately above the zone of decay. Then come the harder questions to tackle, which helps to push us on further to use better scientific modelling for hollow stems. Professor Dr. Klaus Matuk gave advice that if microdrilling for a threshold of thickness for the remaining wood in a hollow tree, one must drill between any buttresses or fluting in the stem. Well, this seems a good way to condemn a tree that's produced specialist support structures that directly address the deficit that we're trying to assess. In contrast, Authors after that see it more common sense to include any such strengthening buttresses as part of the consideration of the tree's likelihood of failure. Practice is changing, and more advanced systems of assessment consider the bending profile of the cross-section using a calculation of the section modulus to inform the risk assessment. There was a class note about using the section modulus to calculate a component's bending strength, so I will not repeat that here, but it is a major improvement that allows non-circular stems and eccentric pockets of decay to be assessed far more accurately. In addition to this improvement of using the section modulus rather than the thickness or thinness of remaining wood, assessments are moving away from a binary safe or unsafe choice around a threshold. Instead, it's better to calculate or estimate the factor of safety of that component part, which allows for much more graduated steps between unacceptable to keep in its current condition and acceptable to keep without any intervention at this point. Okay, so what have we learnt? I would highlight that there are several factors that directly relate to how likely it is that a hollowing tree stem will fail. We need to get more accurate as to the loading that part of the tree receives at different wind strengths and with the wind acting in different directions. The nature and condition of the remaining wood should be accounted for as best we can. For instance, the mature wood formed at the edge of older trees is generally stronger and tougher than the wood that they laid down when they were younger. Also, the condition of the wood inside the hollow may be important, particularly if it's cracking, thus weakening the structure, or conversely, if the decayed wood is still supplying substantial mechanical support to the tree's structure. We should not be using the simple measure of wall thickness, but instead model the cross-section sufficiently that we can calculate the section modulus to a reasonable level of accuracy. It would certainly be better to move away from thresholds too in measuring stem strength and rather do the more holistic job of calculating the factor of safety of a hollowing stem. Well, I say that, but realistically it'll be algorithms stored within a laptop or a computer that will do the calculations. We just need to put in a few inputs. The graph here shows perhaps why previous authors have set thresholds for safety of hollow stems at between 65% to 77% hollowness for an unsafe tree stem. This is the zone where Euler buckling may occur at around 66% hollowness, and then shell buckling may start to occur around 75% hollowness. However, it's still better to consider the service load compared with the loading the hollow stem can actually take to thus calculate its factor of safety. Lastly, as we saw in the previous slide, the hollow section of the tree stem needs to be fairly compared with a relevant reference cross-section. This is because the most common response to internal decay by a tree is for that section of the tree to bulge outwards, with additional wood being added to strengthen the structure, and this can achieve considerable mechanical compensation for what strength has been lost due to the central hollowing. Not taking the tree's response into account will condemn many trees unnecessarily. Thanks for listening to my hot take. Talk again soon.